Hi friends, welcome back. We are in the seed starting room today and we are beginning to start some seeds for this year's garden. So I am doing a few new things this year. This is going to be my first market garden. This is my first time doing soil blocking to start my seeds, and this is my first time ever trying to grow a cut flower garden. And I wanted to show you guys how we are going to be starting our seeds this year, because we are growing a lot. Not only are we expanding our garden to be able to provide for a market, we are also feeding a household of 4, and then my family, if they want to come up and grab fresh produce, I have 4 more mouths to feed. So essentially a household of 8. So I'm growing a lot of food this year, and then because of the markets, I am essentially doing the biggest garden I have ever done. And the purpose of soil blocking is so you can grow more plants in a smaller space. Usually when you're starting from seeds, you buy the little trays with the little cell inserts. Sometimes you end up having to up pot, and it can be a little more costly that way, or it's also a lot of waste. And I've been trying really hard to get away from as much waste as possible. And so I figured this was the year I was just going to try soil blocking. So I have right now a 2x2 inch soil blocker that we're going to use, and I'm going to talk about the formula that I used. So I made a big batch, and this is my dry batch. So I used 2 parts of vermiculite, 2 parts of coconut coir, or core, I'm not really sure how you say that, cocoa coir, and then 3 parts of worm castings. And then I just mixed it all into this big tub with the yellow lid. And then, because you have to wet it and get it compacted into this little tool, I do it in this bucket, where that way I don't introduce moisture into my dry bucket and it doesn't get moldy. And I'm hoping that this big batch that I made will get me through at least the spring and summer garden, and then if I have to make another batch for the fall garden, that's fine. I don't know the exact cost of what I spent, but if you're in the Louisville area, Kentuckiana region, I got all of my supplies, with the exception of the soil blocker, at New Earth Hydroponics off of Taylorsville Road, if you haven't checked them out. And that's where I got all my stuff in bulk from. And then the soil blocker my husband got for me off of Amazon. We have another one on the way that is the really tiny 1x1 inch that I want to try for certain things, but the purpose is so I don't have to up pot them. That way my plants aren't getting too big, and then they're outgrowing their little blocks, and I have to put them into a little bigger block. There are some things that I'm going to start in really, really tiny ones, and then there are some things where I'm going to start in these 2-inch ones, and then eventually I'd like to get a big 4-inch one for bigger seeds like pumpkins and squash seeds, sunflower seeds, things like that. But I think this year we're just going to do the 1x1 and the 2x2 and kind of see how that works for us. So, full disclosure, I've been practicing with this for a couple days, and I don't know how to make this not messy, because you have to get this wet and you have to mix it all up, and there's just no way to around it. You can use garden gloves if you want to, but if I didn't want my hands to get dirty, this wouldn't be a hobby of mine, so I'm really not that worried about it. And I'm going to come over and show you guys what the soil blocks look like. So it basically makes this little square with this little divot in the center for you to pop your seed. And then what it does is, as the plant grows, instead of the roots getting root bound like they would in a nursery pot or like those little seed cells, they air prune themselves, and then the plant continues to produce more roots, and you get a denser root network and a healthier plant, which makes the plant less prone to transplant shock. Now I know we're in the middle of January and it feels way too early to be starting seeds, but because I'm doing a cut flower garden, I need to go ahead and start my snapdragons, and I'm doing an experiment. I'm doing something called stratification, which is where you sow them in the winter, because these are a cooler weather liking flower and they need that cold period. But I have one tray going that I started Sunday already that I did not put my seeds in the freezer, and then this is the pack that I did put in the freezer, and I want to see if there's a difference in germination rate, if one germinates faster. It says it takes up to about 15 days. I started those on Sunday, unfortunately, so we're now on Thursday, so there's going to be a 4-day difference, but I'll just see how fast these germinate. I got these from the New Earth store, and it's just a cutting variety of snapdragons. So they get really tall. Usually when you buy snapdragons from like a box store, unless it specifies that it's a cutting variety, it's usually what's known as a bedding variety. So they're shorter, they're meant for like borders or to be a little bit more in the front and lower growing. But because I'm doing a cut flower garden, I want the really long stems. And I just bought the mixed color package to save a little bit of money, so I didn't have to buy all the different seed packs. I would like to expand into different varieties of snapdragons. They're one of my favorite flowers, but because this is my first year doing a cut flower garden, and a lot of things, I have a lot of variables that are changing this year for us, as far as garden size, as far as how we start our seeds, and I'm in a completely different growing zone, and I'm trying something new. I just decided I was going to buy a mix to offer a variety of colors and stick with that. If you're interested in trying to find different varieties of snapdragons, Johnny Seeds does a really good job of breaking them down by if they're better suited for cooler or warmer climates, like the varieties. And they have a ton of different options as far as cutting flowers. But this year I was just going to keep it simple. Right now I'm just mixing up my dirt. I'm probably going to have to go grab more water. So you want it wet enough to where it holds its shape. It's kind of there, but it's still sort of falling apart. Okay, I'm back. So I have another like half gallon of water, and I'm just going to add like half of the pitcher at a time. Really got to like work from the bottom up. You want to get it all mixed in, and you really want it to hold its shape. From my understanding, when you do this, you're going to want to keep those blocks consistently wet, 1 to 8 in germination and 2 to help them keep their shape. So I use a little sprayer that you would use like if you're doing pest control or something. And that's how I spray my blocks, and that's been working out really well because it's such a fine mist. I don't have any issues with it like dumping out and breaking the blocks apart. But I think if you have like one of those gooseneck watering cans, that would be helpful as well. Now the cocoa coir, you have to soak prior to being able to mix it. So what I did was I soaked the cocoa coir bricks, and then I laid them out to dry with a fan on them for a couple of days, and then that's how I put it in my dry mix, because it has to expand and get fluffy again. It's basically a peat-free alternative, so I think we're getting there. It's starting to hold its shape a little better. You don't want like a ton of water really dripping out. You just want to make sure you can get it into your little tool. So the easiest way I found is to just really smash it into the bucket and just kind of wiggle it. And then sometimes I don't get it all the way in there, and then I just kind of pack it full, and then I rub off the excess, and then we're gonna pop it in our little tray. And what that does is it releases the blocks and creates your little seed divot. Perfect. So with the 2x2 inch block and these tray bottom water things I have, these seed cell holders, I can get 40 plants in one tray. Now I could go out and buy the 72 cell ones that are like really, really itty bitty. My snapdragons are actually going to go out in a couple weeks, in about March or April, while it's still cold and we might still have some snow on the ground. So I didn't want to have to go through the trouble of up-potting them from those really, really tiny cells or the really like tiny 1x1s. So I just decided to do the 2x2 because I would like the plants to be established and a little bigger, and I don't want to have to worry about up-potting them. So I'm going to actually bring you guys closer so you can see what I'm doing, and then we're just going to keep chatting. Okay, so hopefully you guys can see what I'm doing. So I'm just taking the little soil blocker and just really shoving it into the wet soil, essentially. Sometimes you gotta kind of fluff it up. And then sometimes I can't get it like all the way packed in. I think I need a bigger container so I can like scrape up the side wall of the container to really get the dirt packed into it. But again, I don't mind if my hands get dirty. You don't go into gardening expecting to stay clean, especially when it's seed starting season. So, and then I just scrape off this excess after I get it really packed in there. And this is essentially what you're left with. So this makes 8 different little seed pods. And then you're just gonna pull your handle. And there we go. And we're just gonna do that again. Again, this is very messy. I'm sure I'll eventually find a rhythm where it's not as messy. But right now, I haven't quite figured out my system. Probably scoot these over a little bit. So we got 8, 16, 24. We're gonna do 32. I had this little like garden bench when I was little that I got. I think I got it from like the dollar store or something with my grandfather. And it was kind of one of my first lessons in hope. And it took me a while because I was so young. I think I was like 10 when I bought it. And I didn't really understand what it meant. But it had this engraving that said to plant a garden is to dream of tomorrow. And my nan had to explain to me like kind of what it meant. She's like, you plant these seeds and you're hopeful for the blooms and the vegetables and the fruit. And I think that was kind of one of my first thoughts of like understanding what hope meant. And it's kind of funny that I ended up becoming a gardener when I look back at little memories like that. And I get so hopeful when I see the little seeds sprout. Especially during the winter. Winter's still my favorite season, but I do miss the garden fierce when it's winter time. Alright, there's 32, so we're going to do one more. We can fit one this way, and that'll give me 40 plants. We have narrowed down our tomato varieties from the market. So we have about 31 different varieties of tomatoes to keep things simple for us, because some of the varieties we've never grown in this climate and we don't know how they're going to do. We are going to do 3 varieties of cherry tomatoes, 2 varieties of paste tomatoes, and then 3 varieties of what's known as like a slicer, but you can use those as like a preserving tomato if you wanted. They're all heirloom varieties, but I was trying to find a good color balance. I wanted to be able to offer some varieties you don't necessarily see in the grocery stores. That's like one of my favorite reasons why I grow heirloom varieties so much, is because I love to get seeds that are found kind of from all over the world that you don't necessarily see in the grocery store, and you wouldn't have access to experiencing something like that. But I also was trying to find the balance of offering varieties that looked familiar to people, because I know sometimes if things look a little too out there food-wise, people have a hard time wanting to buy that, especially if they don't know if they're going to like it, because it's something they've never ate before. They've never associated a tomato being stripy or colored or anything like that, other than, your red, yellow, orange tomatoes. So I feel like we got a pretty good mix of what we're going to offer our community as far as heirloom tomatoes. And then I think we're doing something like almost 1,000 onions. So I've never started onions from seed, but we're going to be starting them from seed this year. Part of that is, again, I'm growing for almost 8 people, and I'm growing for long-term storage. So I'm growing storage varieties, and then that's also so I can sell at the market. And I'll be right back. We're going to start our snapdragon seeds. Okay, so we made our soil blocks. I'm going to move this out of the way. And we're going to start the snapdragon seeds. Now, snapdragon seeds are extremely tiny, and so I'm going to do my best to only put a couple in each little thing. They also need light to germinate, so I'm not going to cover them. I'm going to pop them in the little seed divot hole the blocker made, and then just slightly push them in. to the best of my ability if I can, because they are extremely tiny. I did do in the first tray the wet toothpick method. I don't have the patience to do that ever again. I'd rather just thin the seedlings and plant too many and compost them, to be honest with you. So I'm gonna come show you guys the seeds. Isn't that crazy? I think it's so wild that this tiny little seed is gonna grow something so lovely and beautiful. So snapdragons are one of my favorite flowers because one, they kind of look like a little dragon head, and you can pinch the side of the flowers and it looks like a dragon. But they also, when the flowers fall off, they kind of, like their little seed pods that are left behind, they look like little skulls, or like little tortured souls or something. I don't know. I love a good little gothic Victorian moment. So they're kind of creepy when the flowers fall off, and I think it's kind of cute. That's one of the reasons they're my favorite. You get this thing of beauty and then a little bit of creepiness at the end when the beauty fades. So I am just doing my best to only put a few in each little pod so I don't waste the seeds. And then once they germinate, I'll give them a couple weeks after they germinate to see if I need to go back in and re-sow any. But I have a feeling I'm starting way more snapdragons than I need. So I've already started another tray of 40, and then this is another tray of 40. So that's 80 plants. I may not need 80 of them, but we're only doing 5 varieties of cut flowers this year, just to keep it simple since we've never done it before. We're doing snapdragons, sweet peas, which are going to be started soon, zinnias, cosmos, and then sunflowers. So the snapdragons and sweet peas are going to be our spring into summer bouquets, and then they will kind of fade into the zinnias and cosmos, and then the zinnias and sunflowers will be our fall bouquets. And then in the summer, we'll have the zinnias, cosmos, and sunflowers as well. And then I'm just going to take my finger and lightly kind of press them into the dirt the best I can. But essentially, they need a little bit of light to sprout. And because they are so tiny, it is easy to miss them when they first sprout. I did grow some from seed last year, but then we moved so quickly, I think they got... they didn't make it. They shocked in the move. But you don't want to like really plant them deep or like bury them like you would other seeds. And there we have it. We got 40 snapdragons. So I always recommend obviously labeling your trays, because I tell myself every year that I'll remember what I planted there, and I don't. I absolutely never remember where I planted what. I just use tape, painter's tape, and a Sharpie. You can buy the fancy like little plant markers if you want. I would recommend getting like a UV resistant marker. That way your seed lights don't fade the marker, but I find that I do just fine with the painter's tape and the Sharpie. And I try to keep all of my varieties in the same container. That way they don't get mixed up. And this year that's going to be really important with us doing a market garden. I don't want things getting mixed up, and I'm going to have to be more diligent about labeling things. Especially growing things like hot peppers and everything. I don't want them in with the sweet peppers or things like that. So I'm just going to label these snapdragons. And I'm going to put stratified on here so I know that this is the tray that was in the freezer. And I'm going to put today's date, which is the 15th. And then on my other tray of snapdragons, I put just snapdragons, unstratified, and then last Sunday's date. So I'm going to go label my tray, and then as soon as they pop, as soon as we get some baby seedlings, I'll follow up with you guys. So I will be back with the follow-up for you guys, and I would love to know what you guys are growing in your garden this year. Bye, friends.